Can you put a light in front of you or to the side?
It's a hotel. I don't have any ability to do that. And
Oh,
it's a fixed desk. I could do actually. This is gonna work better.
aha. That looks great.
Let me elevate. Oh, I feel so much better about that.
You're looking like a movie star, Chris. We're gonna make motion
Good.
pictures with you.
I try to stay behind the camera. I don't need my
Everybody
face
gets.
in front of the camera.
Jack Warner got in front of the camera. Walt Disney did. Louis Mayer. You can be just like him.
Ooh, your
That's how
your
they talk out
19s,
in L.A. That's what.
your
That's how they talk.
1920s this Hollywood accent is spot on.
Thank you, thank you. I've been working on it for years. See, been working on it because I know it's going to come out and make the pictures. Um,
I love it. I love
yeah.
it.
If you're a fan of old SNL, there's a skit with John Lovitz and Phil Hartman where Lovitz plays a 40s like Louis Mayer character, and Phil Hartman's like this washed up kind of Hollywood actor who and like him and Lovitz go back and forth like that. It's about a 5 minute clip from the late '80s SNL, and it's like really funny because it's not real old Hollywood, but it's humorous seeing two comedians kind of play it.
I think I've seen it. Sounds familiar. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. If you liked Phil Hartman and those guys on SNL back in the day.
The golden era.
Yeah, it's true. Give it another minute or so and somebody's filled it in. Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Searles, a moderator here for the MVJ members and welcoming the members to the 2025 Journalist Development Series. I've worked in journalism and had articles published through leatherneckmilitary.com, We Are the Mighty, and Warhorse. I've got an upcoming article from the Marine Corps Gazette coming out soon. And I've also worked in media and entertainment. And then I'm a reservist in the Marine Corps and serve in intelligence. Today, we've got the wonderful Chris Marvin. He is the founder and principal of Marvin Strategies. It's a consulting firm that specializes in narrative strategy for social change. He's a former U.S. Army officer, combat wounded Black Hawk pilot, and Chris has become a national leader in veteran advocacy and media consulting. He was the founding director of Got Your Six, a groundbreaking campaign that partnered with the entertainment industry to transform how veterans are portrayed in film and TV. Under his leadership, the campaign helped shift public perception by encouraging more authentic and nuanced storytelling. Today, Chris advises nonprofits, government agencies, and major media companies, including HBO, NBC, and DreamWorks, which you may understand that being a company associated with Steven Spielberg, on how to use storytelling as a tool for impact. His work sits at the intersection of military service, civic engagement, and a cultural narrative. As part of our journalistic development series, Chris will share his expertise on shaping responsible, resonant narratives, especially when it comes to representing veterans and other communities with lived experience. We're honored to welcome him to this conversation. Please give your undivided attention to Chris as he leads us through today's presentation. And with that, hand it over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Joel. Love that introduction. I appreciate it. I kind of, as I was preparing for this, I felt, um, I don't know, like maybe I wasn't qualified to be speaking to all you professional journalists who hone your craft. I am not a journalist per se. I've written a bunch of op-eds, but I'm not a journalist. But it's the same way I felt when I worked in the entertainment industry. I always worked adjacent to the entertainment industry. I was never like in the industry, but I was working with them and helping with the narrative and the storytelling. And so I figured I'd take the same approach here. So um, I hope that resonates with you all. I'm gonna share my screen here, and hopefully that looks good. If it doesn't, somebody tell me. We're going to be talking about the veteran narrative. Um, this is something I've dedicated, the majority of my career since I've been out of the military to, in some way, shape, or form. Is just this veteran narrative, and that idea of translating the story of service. And that could be a larger story of service, what it means to serve in the military. It could be your own story of service. Or for many, it's actually combined with this story of service that continues after you take off the uniform. So I think all of those are relevant. I really truly believe that culture is shaped by narrative. Sometimes, honestly, shaped by narrative more than it's shaped by fact, whether that narrative is accurate or not. And we probably see that too often in politics, but we also see it in creative content, from social media to big picture, big studio pictures to television and everything in between. And journalism is no exception there. Um, I I was asked to do this presentation because of my involvement with a film that I'll talk about later. Um, but primarily, my work is as a consultant, which is working on narrative building and communication strategy. I tend to be the person who can help apply the veteran narrative or the veteran voice to a social issue. I work in gun violence prevention. I've done a lot of work in national parks advocacy. I've done a lot of work in voting and in volunteering and other measures of civic discourse. You'll hear a little bit about some of that stuff today. Um, and a lot of my work started um, more than 20 years ago when I returned from Afghanistan. When we return, when we take off our uniforms, whether it's coming home from combat or whether it's, getting out of the military, you hear a lot of this stuff. You hear a lot of welcome home and thank you for your service. I got to be honest, I'm gonna go cynical right away with you guys. Like, it wouldn't be surprising me if I walked outside, told someone I was in the military, and they said, "Oh, welcome home," and I'd be like, "I was in Afghanistan in 2004." You're a little late for the welcome home. What do you mean by that? And I've had a lot. I've struggled with some of these phrases sometimes. They make me uncomfortable. I put some questions here for you guys to mull over. We'll keep them rhetorical for now, but when we get into the sharing part of the presentation, I'd love to hear answers to, do these phrases resonate with you? How well do you think the average American understands military service? And if there is a civilian military divide, how does that impact what you guys do when you're telling stories? And does it impact the opportunities that you have as a journalist? Like I said, I've struggled with particularly thank you for your service quite a bit. And the reason was, it wasn't that I had a problem with it. It was that when someone would think, this is we're going way back to, a couple years after I got back from Afghanistan, maybe even when I was still on active duty, people would say, "Thank you for your service," and I would not really know what to say. I would kind of just mutter back, "Oh yeah, thanks for saying that," or I would actually tell them, "Oh, it was no big deal," which is probably not true of most of our military careers. Um, I brought this up to a mentor of mine at the time, and he said, "Oh no, that's easy. I know what you should tell people when they say thank you for your service." And I said, "Okay, what?" And he said, "You should do what your mom taught you to do." What? My mom never addressed this issue with me. He said, "No, what does your mom tell you to do when someone says thank you to you?" Oh, it's like, "I'm taught to say you're welcome." He goes, "Yeah, just say that." And for some reason, and maybe this is again, 20 years ago, this is true, maybe not today, that felt rude to me. Someone says thank you for your service, and I say you're welcome. That felt rude. But over time, I learned, number one, when I said you're welcome, people started to kind of open up more. And number two, as I learned that, I learned that I was the one creating the blockage. I was the one broadening the civilian military divide by saying, "Thank you for saying thank you," which is just weird, or "it was no big deal," and probably putting my hand up like this and basically saying, "Don't ask me any more questions." The minute I said you're welcome, they would say they would feel welcome to ask another question. They might say, "Well, what branch did you serve in? What did you do? What was it like over there?" And so that was empowering for me. I felt like I now could take control of that narrative, that thank you for your service, welcome home narrative, and I could own it for myself, and it gave me an opportunity to have some of the conversations I wanted to have. So here's my story. And I get to pretend for just one moment that I'm a journalist. I hope I got this right. You guys can criticize me later. But I got the lead, the nut graph, and the headline. Is that a decent amount of sort of journalist lingo? I don't know. But the lead is that I'm a fourth generation Army combat veteran. My I was in Afghanistan. My father's in Vietnam. Both my grandfathers in World War II. My great grandfather in World War I. I've had family that served in the Civil War, the War of 1812, Spanish-American War. I skipped that one. And then my sixth great grandfather, William Marvin, along my paternal line, was a private in the New York militia in 1776. So my military service goes back really far. I didn't know any of that when I joined the military. I just wanted money for college. But my dad said ROTC was a good idea. So I did that. Became a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. And fast forward a couple years as a platoon leader in Afghanistan, that's my helicopter. That's the lower half of the picture there. I was in that. I was extracted from that. And this story can be a 20-minute long story or a 20-second long story. I'm going to go a little bit closer to the 20-second. Um, I broke most of the bones in my body. I broke my right foot, my left leg, my right arm, shattered all the bones on the right side of my face, did severe and permanent damage to both knees, both hips, and both shoulders. Basically everything except for my left arm. And my right arm was broken for over a year. My right leg was broken for 2.5 years with no complications. That's just how bad the fracture was. So in this time, I learned one thing, my nut graph here. I learned one thing, which is I was really turned off by the charity, the pity, and the low expectations that came with being a wounded service member. Over time, I got to understand sort of the pity and the charity. Like people feel sorry for you, they want to give you things. Okay, I got that. But it really has created a culture of veteran charity that I sort of eschew. But what I really, really couldn't stand was the low expectations. People telling me, hey, all you need to do, Chris, is learn to walk and everything will be fine. I did learn to walk. You know, I had 2 broken legs, but they healed and I got better and I walk and I'm fine now. I've done a couple of triathlons. But the idea that that's all I was ever going to do, I was 25 years old. I had a whole life to live, right? And so the idea that they were holding low expectations for me bothered me. And I started to see that that was resonant in the entire veteran community. So what I wanted to do was first take control of my own narrative. And then help take control of the veteran narrative in society and what the veteran narrative means across society. Um, sorry, next slide. I can't get it to. There we go. So, what is that narrative problem? Well, I was involved with a bunch of different veteran nonprofits, and then I went to get my MBA. And when I got my MBA, I was hired after I was hired to work for another veteran nonprofit. I was working on getting veterans into national service, and it took about 3 months in that job before I realized the problem isn't we don't have enough. The problem is not that we have too few veterans in AmeriCorps. The problem is that society sees veterans as broken. They also see them as heroes, and they worship them and they tell them thank you and what you did is amazing. But they think that most of us have PTSD or unemployed and are homeless, or sort of at least disproportionately so. And at that time, I looked around and I said, well, why is this happening? And I had a little bit of a connection into the entertainment industry. And I realized that, you know, for years, the entertainment industry had been portraying veterans as such. However, veterans are portrayed in film and television is often how they are going to be perceived in society, especially when the civilian military divide is large. And the only interaction that a civilian might get with a veteran is what they see on TV. So whether it's all the way back to Rambo, and God, Stallone was cut in that movie. Did you guys look at that? I put this picture up here, like, man, that's before even the days of steroids, probably, right? But man, still a broken hero for sure. Um, Deer Hunter, this movie Brothers with Jake Gyllenhaal and Tobey Maguire is probably my least favorite. And of course, Hurt Locker. Like none of these to me are accurate portrayals of the veteran experience or even the military experience. Focus more on the veteran side of things rather than the sort of the combat military side, service side. But they painted a picture that let society know who Hollywood thought we were. So I figured if I could influence that, if I could influence the way that Hollywood was portraying veterans on film and television, then I could potentially change the way they're perceived in society. Um, so we started doing that kind of work. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I started a nonprofit campaign called Got Your Six that worked in the entertainment industry with a very simple message. Honestly, the primary message was veterans are people too. Right? We are not a monolith. We are not fodder. We are not just sort of some background color for a project. You know, veterans are people, and they should be seen on film and television as people. Um, but more specifically, veterans are leaders of civic assets, or at least they should be, and they can be. Veterans are trained by taxpayer dollars to be leaders in the military, so we know that. And veterans should be standing up in their communities and be community builders and sort of have that civic asset role. I have this picture of Ed O'Neill here because this is back then and still today is probably my favorite portrayal of a veteran on film and television. Someone said, what's the best one?" And they think I'm going to talk about, I don't know, American Sniper, Lone Survivor, 2 films I worked on in the background. No, it's Jay Pritchett from Modern Family. And the reason is, if anybody's familiar with the show, he was first and foremost a grandfather and a father, and a loving husband, and a patriarch, and a entrepreneur, small business owner, and the comic relief for a lot of the show. There's a lot of comic relief in that show. Every once in a while, they mentioned that he happened to have been in the Navy, and maybe they'd crack a joke about it, or maybe he'd talk to one of his old Navy buddies, or maybe he'd commiserate with some neighbor who had served in the Army. But it was, a couple times a season. It wasn't the main character. His veteran character wasn't the main element of his character. And that was powerful to me, that he could be a person, just a regular person, and be a veteran too. And so we look at that. Where are these portrayals where they're dynamic characters that happen to be veterans? Um, so I got to work a lot in the entertainment industry on sort of shaping these narratives. Got to talk to writers in writers' rooms. Got to talk to studio heads. Got to work on sort of the charitable aspects of, for example, Lone Survivor. Peter Berg asked me and Got Your Six to run the Lone Survivor Foundation when that film came out. Got to work a little bit with Bradley Cooper and Clint Eastwood on American Sniper, although that story is its own story. We didn't have to shape that story at all. It's more the associations they made outside the film. And and on and on and on. Every major studio network and agency worked with us, and we did this for a few years. And I like to think that we turned the tide a little bit. I like to think that we started seeing more shows like that one on the bottom right, which is actually called a show called Night Shift, which is a little bit corny. It's like an overnight ER not doc, drama. And every once in a while they'd just be like some surgeon would do something amazing in the OR, and the guy next to him would say, "Where did you learn how to do that?" And he would look up all grizzly faced and say, "In Afghanistan." A little bit cheesy, but it was the right thing. It was like, I'm a good doctor because I was in the military, right? Not I have PTSD because I was in the military. Both can be true, by the way. And I don't have any problem with people showing some of the negative sides of military service as long as they're showing the positive sides too. If the only thing you're doing is showing a homeless PTSD-riddled veteran, then you're exacerbating a archetype or a stereotype that does not need any more exacerbation. So here I am walking all around Hollywood and really all around the country because we worked with corporations, we worked with the federal government, the White House, et cetera, and saying veterans are leaders and civic assets. And we want them portrayed like that in film and television. We want them treated like that in the workplace and in the classroom and in your communities. And I kind of had this proof that veterans were leaders, again, because of the taxpayer funded leadership training, but maybe not so much that they were civic assets. So I decided to venture into empirical evidence, data collection, data analysis. And in 2015, you'll see that we published the very first Veteran Civic Health Index with the National Conference on Citizenship. That was Got Your Six sponsored that, worked with, you can see American Express and Points of Light to do it. And it really just showed you that veterans are, trained to be community builders. They are drawn to that ability to serve their neighbors. And the veteran community is relatively diverse by default, with the exception of gender. It's pretty representative of the American population. Um, and so, we want to promote this idea that veterans are civic assets. Well, here's the data pulled from the census that tells us that veterans are more likely to vote and volunteer and help their neighbors and talk to their neighbors and belong to civic organizations and give to charity. And it's not big stuff. It's more like, hey, you donate to your local Goodwill, or if your neighbor's garbage can blows down the street, the veteran is likely to go bring it back. But that's the type of person you want to live next door to. And so we're doing the same thing that I was trying to do in Hollywood, which is normalizing the way the veterans are seen in society. So I was really lucky that in 2021, the Mission Continues hired me as a consultant to then write that version of the Veteran Civic Health Index, or the second big refresh of it. And then in 2025, an organization called We the Veterans has hired me to write the brand new Veteran Civic Health Index, which we were hoping to have published by the 4th of July. That has been pushed back. If it had been published by the 4th of July, I was going to be able to offer all of you an embargoed copy of it. If it was something that you wanted to see, read, potentially write about when the embargo is lifted, I'd still love to do that. I'd still love to work through MVJ to get you guys an embargoed copy so you can see it in advance. Um, Spoiler alert, it says the veterans are on average better citizens than, the typical American. Um, but that was really powerful, and it continues to be powerful now. Um, and so I want to bring that to two case studies. And here's where we're going to talk about one case study is from about 10 years ago. You see it in front of you. The next one is from 2025. And I want to get feedback here. I know we have a relatively small group, so I'm hoping that that will allow for some feedback. I can't see everybody on my screen, Joel. So if you're able to help me, if someone has a question, or if they can just, or if they have an answer, or if they can just shout out, that would be wonderful. But I want to talk about redeployment. I don't expect that you all have read this book, but I certainly expect that some of you have read this book. It won the National Book Award in 2014. That's not a veteran award, right? That's a writer's award. And so that's sort of breaking that glass ceiling for veterans, I guess, and sort of being recognized in the overall space as a narrative or a series of narratives, really, because what Phil wrote here was a series of short stories. I'm curious if there are folks who have read this book, if they have thoughts on what impact this book had on the veteran narrative. And if well, then let's go to the second question after that. But does anybody want to volunteer? Does anybody have opinions on this book? Has anybody read it? I'm happy to give mine, but I'd love for it to come from you all. So a lot of people compare this book to The Things We Carry for the Vietnam generation, and sort of a manifest of what veterans thought they needed to see. Um, so Phil's a friend, and Phil was a friend before this book came out. Um, and we worked a lot on a lot of stuff. And Phil would tell you that he needed to tell these stories. And maybe some of you know Phil too, but he needed to get these stories off his chest. If you haven't read the book, by the way, I still recommend going to get it because it speaks truth to veterans. Um, and this one touched me because it was that manifest of what veterans wanted and needed to hear. Um, and my second question would be, and now if someone wants to give this a shot, they can, even though we didn't answer the first, but what happens when we don't tell these stories? If you have this idea that I'm telling you that these are not the glorified war stories. These are not the pity party stories. There's a short story in here that's told almost exclusively in acronyms. It's like he squeezed as many acronyms as he could, almost as like a sarcastic nod to the military's use of acronyms, right? But there's funny stories, there are powerful and poignant stories. But it is when a veteran reads it, I believe it's like, oh, this is the shit that I was trying to share with my mom, my spouse, my children. This is the story that I have a story like this that I wanted to tell my buddies who didn't serve, tell them all about. And so I'm curious if that resonates with you, if you're looking for that, what happens to us and what happens to society if we don't tell those stories? Do you have thoughts on that? I'll make Joel Clutch start calling on people soon.
Sure, absolutely. Matthew, do you have anything you'd like to share on that subject?
Oh wow. No, not currently though. I appreciate the insight. I haven't read this at all, so I've definitely put it on my list though.
Okay, someone who has read it. Jennifer, Jeff, Keith.
Um, I did not yet, but I think to make a run at your question, Chris, I think what happens when the stories aren't told is that what percentage of our population now has served in some capacity in the armed forces? 3% or something, and the rest of our fellow citizens don't know. Um, they have no idea really of what we did, where we went, and what was accomplished. So, not having read one word, I think that our fellow citizens need to know what's contained in that book.
I think that's more or less the answer that I'm looking for, and I'm going to expand on it. I think, first of all, since you asked, 7.4% of all adult Americans have served in the military, not including those who are currently serving, which is another million people. So about 18 million living veterans right now, about a million in the military. So, um, it's one in, was that one in, is that one in 12, one in 13? I like to point that number out, by the way, when I talk to people. Like, if you go to a grocery store, like 1 in 13 adult Americans is a veteran, or 13 or 14, depending on what state you live on. You see 14 adults, there's probably a veteran in the grocery store, right? If you're only looking at men, it's actually more like 1 in 8. It's not a lot. 1 in 8 is still, a small percentage, but you get a big enough room and there's veterans there, right? So I try to remind people who are trying to work with veterans, they're all around you. Um, Not like they were in 1974 when they were three-quarters of Congress, right? Or the 19, obviously then to the baby boomer era post World War II when it was just like every male had served in some way, right? But they're still around. And I think you're right. That disconnect, that civil military divide is bigger if we can't share these stories, if Phil can't share these stories. Um, I also think, and this is more true I'm going to say this, I'm not sure if I believe it, more true in 2014 than it is today. The veterans were complicit. Just like I was complicit in the thank you for your service dynamic, the veterans are complicit in broadening the civilian military divide because we're afraid to tell our own stories. So in that fact, when we say this story, and I made it intentionally vague, right? Is it these stories? Is it your stories? Is it Phil's stories? Is it the stories that are literally in this book? Is it stories that I tell because I read this book? Doesn't matter. But specifically the veteran telling his or her own story, for lack of that, for any reason, we broaden the divide and we're just as complicit. So Phil took a step, I think, in writing this book in a way that could bridge and connect to the civilian community to the point of winning a National Book Award, right? Um, he told a lot of stories for a lot of us. A lot of people read this and then understood me better, or you guys better. So if you haven't read it, I encourage it. In fact, as I put it in this slideshow, it's the first time I've ever put it in a deck like this, a presentation I've done. So when I did, I thought, man, I need to read this book. So, so maybe we'll all just do a little book club and read Redeployment. It's also short stories, so if you want to read it in pieces, that's actually super easy too. Um, all right, so next case study, and I'm curious if anybody has seen this film. 2025 is My Dead Friend Zoe. I'm fairly certain it's available today on Apple and Amazon for purchase or rent. Check your local streaming provider. Um, it's at theaters on February 28th of 2025. You see Morgan Freeman, Ed Harris, Sonequa Martin Green, Natalie Morales, an amazing cast. All four of those characters are veterans. One of those four actors is a veteran. If those who you don't know, Morgan Freeman is an Air Force veteran. And so I'm curious and you don't have to, if you haven't seen the film, you don't have to answer specific to the film. I can fill you in on stuff. But I'm curious if we think, since what we just talked about with Phil in 2024, 2014 and redeployment to now, 2025, My Dead Friend Zoe, but everything else that exists in society, does this film or does, the fact that a film like this hit theaters and won awards at South by Southwest and other film festivals, does it demonstrate a change in the narrative? And if someone's seen this, speak up and tell me what you think of it. I'd love to hear it.
As a moderator, I'm waiting for other folks, but I have seen it, and I actually interviewed Kyle Hausman Stokes, the writer director, and I did interview Sonequa Martin Green, the lead. So I'm very familiar with the film, familiar with Kyle. I've had lunch with him, so I think it's great. I think it brings a different. It's a drama. It's a dramedy basically. It's not a war film. It has war in it for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Anybody else? I definitely have strong opinions and I'll share them and let other folks speak first.
I had not watched it yet.
Mariah, have you seen it?
Jerry says he saw it. He doesn't change the narrative, but it adds a unique element to it. I like that. That's interesting. Well, I'll tell you. So I I'm a producer and an impact producer for this film. So I helped make this film, worked with Kyle very closely for some passion project. Um, I worked with Kyle from the time he wrote the script in 2020 all the way through 2025 on the screen, and We went through made a short film also called Merit and Zoe, which was what helped us get attention from a production company. Here's what I think of this film, and I've had time to professionally hone this opinion. This is the film that veterans need to see, not for themselves, but they need to see it with the people they love in their life the most. When it was in theaters, I was encouraging people, go to the theater and take your spouse, take your parent, take your child, take your best friend, take your neighbor, whoever it is that you value and that you want to share a part of your life with, that military part of your life, that veteran experience. Take them to this film because I promise you it will crack that open for you. It will allow you to, first of all, it's a fantastic film. I'm biased, obviously, but it's a fantastic film, powerful ending. You'll walk out of the theater, there'll be tears, the whole 9 yards. And then you'll be compelled, like, either to say, when I was in the military, here was my experience. Or the person you take with you will say, did you do anything like that? Do you feel like that? Does that experience resonate for you? And, you know, at the risk of being pithy, which you guys are forced to do all the time, you want to say more and you have, less words to work with or page space or whatever. That's it. That conversation is all that matters when we talk about the civilian military divide, when we talk about sharing these experiences, when we talk about why it is that America sends young men and women to war. These conversations that's it. That is the crucial element. And we took it for granted in this country in the World War II era because everybody had an experience. Everybody had a dog in that fight. Everybody shared in the burden. And then that wasn't as true in Vietnam, although the draft helped it be more true than it is now. Totally different war. And then in post 9/11 wars, some of the wars felt invisible for a lot of people, right? From the very beginning, from the go shopping instruction all the way through the withdrawal, like it was somewhat invisible. But a lot of thank you for your service. So this tiptoes along all of those narratives. It also is multi-generational because both Morgan Freeman and Ed Harris's character are Vietnam era veterans, right? And then Sonequa and Natalie's characters are post 9/11 era veterans. And there's more veterans in this. Again, Kyle, the writer director, veteran. Me as a producer, veteran. A lot of the crew, veterans. A lot of the other actors who had small roles were veterans. So more than half of the people who were actors in this film were actual veterans and playing veterans. So um, does it make a difference? Does it truly matter? I don't know. I think it does. I really do think it does, but it's not the film that makes the difference. It's the response that we provide. So I think that's where this starts to come in. So the response that we have as veterans is important, and the response that you have as journalists is really important. I think that you guys as veteran journalists have this ability to translate the veteran experience, whether that's your experience or an experience that you're writing about. And I think there's a few things that if this talk has taught you or left anything with you, I hope that you will obviously assume that veterans are trained leaders, right? You know that you are, but assume that we all are. Um, Embrace that demographic stereotype that we're civically healthy because I've given you empirical evidence to prove it, and hopefully we'll give you a new version of that in the next month or so, the Veteran Civic Health Index. But I think you guys have this unique opportunity to invoke the trust and the respect of the American people by sharing this true narrative. I'll give a quick tangent to that. When I started working in gun violence prevention, I worked for Everytown for Gun Safety as a consultant, the biggest gun violence prevention organization in the country. And they said, why should we use veterans to help accomplish our mission? I said two reasons. Number one, veterans are respected by the American public for their service, by most people anyway. Number two, veterans are trusted for their opinions on guns because they come from a profession of arms. There you go. Trusted, respected, that's credible. That's all you really need. You guys have the same thing when it comes to storytelling and narrative translation, right? You have the respect from your service. Now, how are you showing that true narrative? And I think you guys, in a way, you still serve as veteran journalists and you have an obligation to your community. And that is intentionally a double-sided word, community. You have a responsibility to your community, meaning anybody who will read the work that you put out, your digital community, your physical community, doesn't matter. You also have a responsibility to the community that we all exist in, this veteran community, to be the one who carries those messages forward. So I'm gonna give my last slide here is what I'm calling a real life example. I'm curious what people think of this because you don't have to have read a book or seen a movie to see this one. This is a real life application. A month or so ago, the California National Guard was called to Los Angeles, and the Marines from 29 Palms were eventually moved to active duty Marines were eventually moved to Los Angeles. If you walked out of your house or your office, wherever you are right now, and you asked the first 10 people you saw what the difference was between those California National Guardsmen and the Marines, do you think they could tell you the difference? Active duty Marines and Army National Guard folks? I would guess probably not. 1 in 10, maybe. They sure as hell couldn't tell you about the Insurrection Act. They sure as hell couldn't tell you about Posse Comitatus. They sure as hell couldn't tell you like what sort of constitutional elements are at play, and how those things are decided, what power the governor has, what power the president has. And I know that we didn't learn that stuff in boot camp, right? But you're smart and you research and you find it and you know it, and maybe you have studied constitutional law since then, who knows? But as a veteran, you speak volumes when you say it out loud. When you try to explain, no matter what you're saying, whether you're giving an opinion piece about why it shouldn't be done, whether you're just previewing what the judiciary might say, or whether you're just reporting on the fact that they're there. As a veteran, you carry more credibility speaking on these things. And I'd love to know if you guys have anything to offer on that. I'd love to know if folks have reported on this, this was any aspect of what happened in LA. Still kind of happening, I believe, but lost in so many other things, the sale of public lands and I don't know, the budget and whatever else. What what were your experiences with potentially reporting on or even thinking about reporting on this instance? Somebody has to have opinions on this.
Yeah,
You guys
Matthew, do you have any thoughts? Keith?
are...
I have an opinion. Um, I think it sets a very bad precedent of what might come. I actually grew up in Cuba, so I see how the military can be used for controlling the population, the general population. So there's a purpose of the military, and it's to defend our country. So I think it should be limited to that. You know, we're trained different than the police and the civilian population. We train to kill. We train to respond, and it just can get out of control real quick. So, yeah.
Unfortunately, they didn't, at least not to the degree, and I'm thinking, dating myself here now back to Rodney King. I'm in Long Beach, and actually I'm 1 mile from the Paramount Home Depot, where a few weeks ago all this began. Rodney King, it was 2 lawless days until the National Guard was on the street, and I think that at least the people here welcome that because the police had lost control of the city. This was different though. It was sporadic. It was kind of isolated to different patches. I mean, like I say, a mile from the Paramount when there, everybody just went on, led their life as if that was not occurring. It was extremely ominous, at least to me, when the Marines were sent. And I read a piece, I want to say it was in the Los Angeles Times, that were quoting several of the Guards folks, and especially the Marines, that, hey, look, we weren't trained for this. We don't want to be here. And the police will all tell you the same thing. Just like they're not trained to be active duty military. You know, policing is way different from military action. So those are sort of my takeaways, you know, from this. I will just add this little capstone. There's considerable evidence that people are still spooked, at least in greater LA, over all this, because public events and so on are just not attended anymore because people are afraid that they're going to be rounded up and and hauled off.
I think that's all really powerful. And look, as you're talking about, I even had this thought, like you read the piece in the Los Angeles Times or wherever you read it, um, and it makes me wonder who wrote the piece, right? I will tell you right away, like if a veteran wrote that piece, I have more confidence in it. I do like the point in chat that you also need to think about these veterans or these future veterans and how this affects them in the long run. Hopefully not too much. I mean, this is not Kent State, right? If we could go farther back than Rodney King, I'm not dating myself because I wasn't alive when it happened, but at Kent State, the National Guard killed somebody. And that person obviously has to deal with that for the rest of their life. There's a whole nother side of my work where we talk about how military people understand the gravity that comes with using a firearm or another weapon to take a human life. And most Americans kind of take that for granted and just shout Second Amendment, Second Amendment. But that's not what I'm talking about here. Look, I think that the rhetorical questions I'll leave you with and then I would love to take your questions, is thinking about this real life application, thinking back to my dear friend Zoe, redeployment, which you should, if you haven't watched and read, thinking about the story that I told, but also reflecting on your own story. Who shapes the narrative, right? Who is responsible for shaping your narrative? Who is responsible for shaping who veterans are in society? Um, whoever it is who's telling us what we're supposed to think. And when society or an administration tells us something about veterans in the military that we find to be untrue or deceptive, what's our role as veterans? And then what is your role as a journalist? To report on it, to correct the record, to shape the narrative yourself. And I'm sure it depends on who you're working for and what your assignment is. But those are the rhetorical questions that I would leave you with. And my favorite slide is the last one. Let's keep talking about this shit. I mean that literally right now. Let's keep talking about it. I'd love to have any questions from you and know what you think. We can ask me anything you want about my experiences. But also like once this webinar ends, like let's keep talking about this shit. It's important. I'll kick it back to you, Joel, if we're gonna have a moderated conversation or however you want to see this flow.
Yeah, who has questions here? Please raise your hand or reach out here on the chat and unmute yourself. Anybody? Let's see. They're asking if you would, Jerry's asking if you'd share your email. Do you have an email you would
Yeah.
like to?
Sure, yeah. So my URL for my webpage is at the bottom of the page here. My email is just chris@marvinstrategies.com. So CHRIS at. There you go.
Chris, I got a question if you can take one.
Yes, sir.
Um, as journalists, our job is to sort of explain things. And maybe not with a finality or a totality, but at least to be able to offer some perspective as to what things mean as we're reporting them. I think that we'd all agree that's an essential part of what we do. But sometimes I think now I'll be darned if I understand, who we are anymore or what we value. And so that leads to my question that I notice maybe more so now than before every Memorial Day, because I've asked over the years a couple of our Congress folks to if they would institute a moment of silence at noon or any other prescribed time across the country. And apparently there is something in the books, but it's not done. So instead, I think for the rest of our fellow citizens, Memorial Day is two things. It's a day of mattress sales and car sales.
Yeah.
And then sort of launch of summer barbecues. But there's, little to no mention of the sacrifices that were made, to allow that day. Like I say, I'll be darned if I can explain why we don't seem to want to even pause for a moment, but we don't. And I don't know, your thoughts.
Yeah. So the thing I always think about first is like, I don't know what to do on Labor Day. Am I supposed to thank union guys? I don't, that's, I actually have that problem, so I don't want to be completely non-complicit in this, but Memorial Day. Um, look, I'll add something to your list. You ever have somebody walk up to you and be like, Happy Memorial Day, thanks for your service. And you're like, I'm living, I'm alive, not my holiday.
No, they confuse Memorial Day with Veterans Day.
And they confuse Veterans
And
Day with Memorial Day, and then on Veterans Day,
yeah,
they say, all those who have paid the greatest measure of devotion, last full measure of devotion, we celebrate them on Veterans Day. It's like, no, you don't. Wait till May. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how you get society to do more. I think it's in narrative. I think it's in reporting. I think it's in creative content. I think it's in um, all of those things. I mean, you're never going to stop the mattress sales and the barbecues. I like to think, I mean, so look, I have a very specific situation here, where I was in a helicopter crash, and you got a snippet of it. 15 people on board, four crew, um, 11 combat loaded Marines in the back. Uh, 14 of 15 survived, but Sergeant Daniel Galvin died. Um, and it didn't take me too long, by too long, I mean, a couple of years before I realized like um, everything that I can do to move forward with my life honors him and his family and the inability that they have to move forward with his life, right? I think that's something a lot of veterans have thought about and come that conclusion they've come to. You live on not as a proxy for them, but you just live your life. You don't have to be sad all the time, right? You live your life because that's what they would want. I treat the barbecues the same way, Jeff, to be honest. I'm like, would Dan want me to like eat a burger and throw back a couple beers at the beach? Hell yes, he would. He would have been grilling the burgers. So, you know, that I don't have that beef, no pun intended, with people doing that. But it would be nice if it were around a similar sentiment, right? It would be nice if there was a conversation had. You've seen Major League Baseball do some stuff about it. It's a bit of a patriotic flaunt, but they do a Memorial Day thing. They also do a Mother's Day thing and a Father's Day thing and a Fourth of July thing. So that's it's not the only thing they do, but they have special ball caps and stuff, and where like the flag is usually inserted inside the team's logo. Um, and so maybe we've gotten better at it, but I'll tell you what. I'll shift this to Veterans Day real quick, and then I'll come back to Memorial Day again because Veterans Day is our holiday as the living veterans. And I've often told people like this goes back more than a decade. Like I wrote an op-ed somewhere that said what you can do for me on Veterans Day is just have a conversation with a veteran. Just ask me one fucking question. And then I'll give you an answer, then ask me another, I'll give you an answer, and ask me another. And I don't care if you ask me what the weather was like or what the chow tasted like in Afghanistan. Those are questions that are interesting. Let's talk about it. And so I think that there's just, again, to make it pithy and simplistic on Memorial Day, talk about it. The more you talk about it, the better. And yeah, the more you petition your member of Congress to have a moment of silence, I think that's great. Can't force them to do it, but what can you do? You know, what can you create in your community? And again, your local community, your community that reads what you write, other veterans. So I think that would be my answer for Memorial Day. But I see it less as a obligation for all Americans to pay homage to those who have died in service to the country, and more as a window of opportunity to do so for those who wish to. And there's a freedom in that as well, right?
Any other questions there? You got Jerry or Gennaro. Sam, I saw you pop up here on video. Didn't know if there's anyone else who had follow-ups or maybe.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. And first, Chris, it's been a long time. We are much grayer than the last time we saw each other. It's good to see you still here, fighting the good fight.
Likewise.
There were 2 points here that kind of stuck with me. And one, you were talking about some things like, Phil's book, which I think one of the first times I met you was at an event where we had Phil there, where
Right.
he was speaking about the book.
Right.
Um, but with that, I wonder, sometimes I think as great as that book was, like, how much is that reaching the community outside of our veteran community? So I wonder if you have thoughts on how we can maybe go beyond that to
Yeah.
get those stories out. And then the second one, um, was just more when you talked about like getting to like the real world implications and talking about things like the recent deployments of the Guard and Marines to Los Angeles. And with that, just in my own world, with where I'm working now at Fordham University in the military veteran office, we had a number of National Guardsmen who were worried about having to drop out of classes
Mm.
because they were activated by the governor for riots that were happening in New York prisons. So I think with that, a lot of times we think about the bigger story, like, oh, how crazy is this that you have the military there, and yes, posse comitatus, all of those different elements that go into it. But you go even deeper, the real world implications of that are like these guardsmen like might have had to drop out of school. They're leaving their employers. What can we do as journalists that are here to better tell those stories to go a little deeper into it?
Yeah. Let me take the first one first. Okay, so let's talk about the book, and I gotta make sure I can remember what to talk about. First, talk about the book, then we'll talk about
And
guardsmen.
with that is like, what can we do to like just expand those great stories outside of the
Yeah.
tribe, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's certainly something I hope that my dead friend Zoe could do, right? And when you get attention and you win awards, other people see. I mean, that's why the reason I called out Phil's book, and there's dozens of books we could have called out, but Phil's won the National Book Award, right? And it was recognized by a non-veteran, non-military entity that this is a good piece of writing, and the content is just happens to be about veterans and the military. So that was what was interesting about it. Um, I always, it's so interesting. Lone Survivor, I mentioned it before, also from the book, Marcos Luttrell's book. I don't think it's a secret. I'm not a huge fan of Marcus or what his politics say, or his brother's politics for that matter. But, respect his service like I do anyone else's. Worked on the film in the sort of post-production, charitable partnership stuff. Um, I've always told people I love that film because before Lone Survivor happened, the film before the film was released. You could walk down the street and ask somebody, could you tell me the name of a battle from the Civil War? And they'd be like, yeah, Gettysburg. Can you tell me the name of the battle from World War II? And they'd be like, oh yeah, D-Day or whatever. Even a battle for the American Revolution, the first war, like, oh, yeah, like Bunker Hill or whatever, right? People just spit these out, right? Can you tell me the name of a battle or any type of conflict or any named activity from the longest war in the history of America, which at the time was Afghanistan already. And then I don't know. Maybe someone says Tora Bora? Maybe, right? And they did it was fucking ongoing and they couldn't tell you anything about it. Couldn't tell you anything about it. So at least when Lone Survivor came out, the answer could then be, oh, that Lone Survivor thing. They don't have to know Operation Red Wings. They don't have to know that. They could say that lone survivor thing. That was a thing that happened in Afghanistan, and maybe they could say more. So I think now they Abbottabad, right? But wrong. That's in Pakistan. Trick question. But the idea that it brings people closer to what's actually happening is important. So one step at a time, right? Back to the book. I think. I don't think it's something that we need to be re-promoting today. I think it's aged nicely, like a fine wine, but it's going to be now just for the connoisseurs, just like a fine wine would be. And so we try to create new stuff like this, and I again hope my dead friend Zoe is one of them. There will continue to be books and podcasts and magazine articles and films and TV shows that are about veterans or written by veterans or featuring characters who are veterans. And the more we can influence those, the more we can get people talking about it. At the end of the day, all I really care about is it's normalized, right? It's not overvalorized. I used to say that veterans actually in Hollywood specifically, and probably in a lot of media, veterans are either broken or heroes, right? Like I said at the beginning, the broken hero paradox. But they're either broken or they're heroes. And for those of us who took statistics in college, I will tell you that those things exist. The broken veterans and the heroic veterans, they are long tails on a normal distribution of veterans, right? There's just a few of them and they're out there on the edges. They're this tall. Meanwhile, I got this giant bell curve in the middle that's the rest of us. And where are we? Where are we being talked about? And so that's what I got your six. We were trying to say like normalize veterans. Ed O'Neill, Jay Pritchett, like that is what I want to see. You know, Merritt and Zoe in My Dead Friend Zoe are pretty normal ass veterans, right? They're just people. One of them's going to therapy. The other one's dead. If you didn't realize that from the title, it's Zoe. Spoiler alert: Zoe's dead in My Dead Friend Zoe. Um, but um, but you know that makes her abnormal, I suppose, or paranormal, I suppose. But the long story short is normalizing these conversations, normalizing service, normalizing being a veteran is harder. The smaller proportion we get, which by the way is going to level out. It's going to level out in the next less than a decade. We'll kind of settle in right at one proportion. But yeah, that's that normalizing military service, I think, is crucially important as we kind of go into a new dawn here, a brave new world of what the military does. I mean, we're thinking about everything right now from policing Los Angeles to fighting a war with Iran to downsizing our military because we want NATO to upsize theirs. I don't know. I don't know what our military is going to look like in 10 years. All we can deal with is what it's looked like for the past, half century, and those of us who have served in it. So, that was a non-answer to a long non-answer to a very good question. I will say about the guardsmen, um, just one comment about the guys in New York. I am the son of a guardsman, right? My dad retired as a '06 state aviation officer of Illinois. He was in a uniform my whole life, but he's full-time guard. I never moved. I lived in the same house from when I was 1 year old in 1980 until they moved in 2020. So I'm a military kid, but not a military brat, maybe? I don't know. Part like the guys who gotta go do the prison stuff at the governor's behest, it sucks. That's what you signed up for, and we got to figure out how to support them at Fordham or wherever else, right? And it sucks to get deployed, but it always sucks to get deployed. At least you're doing it for the right reasons. To transpose that onto these guys who are missing classes at UC Riverside or wherever they're going to school, right? And so that they can sit there on the stairs of a Capitol building or a federal building and do fucking nothing. That's I mean, that's posturing. It's they're pawns in a chess game or whatever analogy you want to make. And so I think it's a totally actually different question. When the powers that be outstrip their authority, and then use the military for political reasons. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, I would just say my question was more just about the fact that because I think what they're doing, and when you get into the politics and all of that, it's like very much a 35,000 foot ceiling. But when you get into the real life impact,
Right.
like I think journalists here can be thinking more about like beyond this story of like, oh, look at these, troops who are, detaining people, whatever, and debating the political stuff. At the same time, they're giving up their lives. They've got families, they've got school, they've got jobs, everything else. And I think sometimes those stories are missed. And I'm just trying to think about how do we better tell maybe the real life implications when you
Right.
get down to the weeds of what it means for that individual who has been activated. You know what I mean?
You guys have this uncanny opportunity and hopefully the ability, because I will say it's easier said than done, the ability to humanize these issues, right? That's what journalists can do. And I mean, I'll just give a small example. Like when all of the immigration ICE raids started, I mean, they're still going on. But when they first started, I had a trip to the mainland. I live in Hawaii, by the way. I'm in Boulder right now in a hotel room. If you couldn't tell, it's not my art. But I took a trip to the mainland and I was like in New York City, right? It's one of the most diverse places. And I'm, staying in a hotel and I'm walking through the airport and I'm taking an Uber and realizing every person is from a different ethnic background, speaks a different language, all this stuff. And I'm sitting here thinking like, who's my Uber driver? Right? Like, and is he afraid? I don't know if he's an immigrant or what his immigration status is, and is he afraid? And it immediately makes me think like, stuff is really, really real. This isn't a name on a page. It's not a story about those people, right? You can humanize it so quickly. And if empathetic people do that naturally, but you guys have this amazing opportunity to sort of draw out the empathy. And I think it'd be a really compelling story, Sam, to talk about, a guy who had to miss a semester to serve his country in the National Guard in New York because of prison riots. That is serving your country, at least your state, serving your state militia. Um, and and maybe he then falls behind, and maybe he doesn't get his degree on time, and maybe he can't afford another semester. I'm sure there's things in maybe Title 32, right? That allow for him to sort of come back and try to get stuff done. But that doesn't always work out because his girlfriend's pregnant, or what he had this much time to finish it, or the GI Bill loophole. I don't know, right? And you're here, people like you guys can be there not to just help him with it if you're positioned to do that, but to humanize that story as journalists. So that's super powerful.
Thanks.
It's all storytelling, right? All narrative.
Exactly.
Anyone else have any insights or thoughts or questions for Chris?
All right, couple homework assignments. Number one, watch My Dead Friend Zoe because you have to pay for that. And theoretically, I would get paid a little tiny portion of it someday if the movie ever makes a profit. But if you know anything about Hollywood, movies never make profit. They just spend more on marketing and never pay out people like me. So don't worry about it. Go watch it if you can. I think it's about 20 bucks. Bring a couple friends. Watch it with a friend. Watch My Dead Friend Zoe with a friend, a family member, who you would like to then have a conversation about your own military service with. Trust me. Trust me on this. It doesn't matter what era you come from either, because you can relate to the Vietnam folks, you can relate to the post 9/11 folks, or anywhere in between. Um, Assignment number one, optional for extra credit, read redeployment. And then number three, pay attention when I find a way to, through MVJ channels, share with you a early copy of the Veteran Civic Health Index. And if you have the capacity and the outlet to write about it and to share it, would love help sharing that 2025 Veteran Civic Health Index. And just it should be the basis of another story you want to tell, and use it as that basis. In fact, I'll tell you one more quick anecdote. I presented to a group of veteran leaders about the Veteran Civic Health Index pre-release. This is just last 2 weeks ago. And a guy was there who was the former speechwriter for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs at the end of the Biden administration. And he said, "Hey man, whenever I got to tell you that the 2021 index, so the index was already 3 or 4 years old. He said, I was using that in every speech just to be like, veterans volunteer this much, veterans vote this much." I kept it on my desk and I used it all the time. And I love that. And he knew that. And that's an important high level place. And it's getting into the mouth of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. That's huge. Um, you guys should do that too. Like keep it with you and use it in everything you do because it's the idea of civic engagement, touches so many aspects of what we're talking about in the veteran community. And by the way, this Civic Health Index also takes a small dive. We don't have the same data sets, but a small dive into the military family community and sort of their civic health and civic health indicators. They're obviously not identified on the census, so we can't use the same data, but we made some assumptions. And it also dives into some of the patriotism paradox. Patriotism paradox being, as fast as the right is co-opting flag and patriotic iconography, the left is willingly letting it go. And both are equally to blame for that because we only have one flag. And so as veterans, we need to kind of stand in the middle and keep that flag flying. Right side up or upside down, depending on how you think the country's going. That is your choice. But keep that flag flying. So, but yeah, with that, I'm happy if they're happy taking the question. I'm happy to let you guys go back to your what is it? I'm traveling. Is it Tuesday? Your Tuesday evening? Yeah. Okay, your Tuesday evening. We good, Joel?
We're good. You want to wrap it up here? I don't have any other questions, and it's been a pleasure. So thanks for your time, and everyone, if you have any other comments, please make them here now. If not, yeah, I'm sure you can reach out to Chris there via his email. So have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chris.